right, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Sorry to break up the good conversations out there, but we have a lot of content. Now we're covering the second half of the event, and it's Lincy, and I want to start with, there's our mission statement or our charge, but there's a bigger question here, and I want to address it directly, which is, and I'm putting Pruitt-Igoe up there for a specific purpose. Years ago, in the 1990s, most of the 1990s, I worked at Fannie Mae, which I have to look downcast now to say, because people are like, oh, you worked at Enron then. But I worked at Fannie Mae, and I was in charge of metropolitan research at Fannie Mae. And I had actually a big budget. And it was the second budget in the US dedicated to that area of expertise after HUD. And also at Fannie Mae, I was part of the corporation. I was also part of the foundation. And there were folks in the foundation who would say to me, for your budget, which included, by the way, putting on these fancy conferences, I love props, with these big fancy binders, which is on the 1999, we did the 50th history of the Housing Act of 1949, which gave us urban renewal and all the sort of changes in public housing that you'd see. And they'd say to me, listen, Rob, for the couple of $1 million you have, do you know how many planks of wood that translates into? Do you know how much brick and mortar that translates into? You know how many people's lives would be changed because they could be living in a unit as opposed to you and your fancy friends at all these big universities sitting around trying to figure out how to count the homeless and things like that? And I said, well, you know what? The federal government at one point had a lot of money, and it put a ton of resources into public housing. And it did not have any intellectual basis for doing it. In fact, it was in defiance of good sense. It plowed over communities. They called it the federal bulldozer. It built giant public housing. It cut people off from the street. They couldn't even watch their kids on the street. It changed their relationship to community. And it was all good. It was all good housing. Technically, it was well designed and well executed, big slabs of pure, unadulterated alienation. So I would say, listen, the problem with just throwing money at something is, number one, my budget is piddling. And the reason I'm connecting this to Lincy now is that Lincy, despite the look that it had a lot of resources, the money wouldn't go for an hour and a half on a Tuesday afternoon fixing what's wrong with Las Vegas. The money was instead for rethinking how to fix Las Vegas. So the Lincy charge is really, we know it's broken. It's been broken for a while. There's lots that's broken. How do we know what to fix? How do we count what's broken? How do we figure what level of impact we would have if we use such and such an intervention? So like the issue on Pruitt-Igoe, and I'll go to the next slide here, which is that was the dream of Pruitt-Igoe. Long before Pruitt-Igoe lost its, let's say, life cycle, it didn't age out of place, it was dynamited. All that bricks and mortar came down because that was the wrong kind of brick and mortar. And it's the same thing here. Despite the generosity of the Lincy Foundation, despite the scale of investment, it's small change compared to the scope of the problem. It's large change, and it's a lot of impact for the intellectual understanding of the product. And that's the spirit by which we approach this. In other words, we're not offering direct philanthropy. We had a philanthropist, actually. We were the recipient of direct philanthropy. We're offering instead a total reframing, a total game change on problems that have been vexing Las Vegas for decades. That Las Vegas, this largest new big city in America that came to scale almost in an instant, accumulated in that process tons of problems that some of which are comparable to other regions, some of which are going to have to be solved on its own terms. Separating that, understanding that, that's a big intellectual product. And what you're going to see today is the effort towards getting the handle on all that. And so again, Lincy has been in the weeds just like Brookings, where Brookings is looking at economic development and transportation and areas like that. Lincy has been focused on areas like health, education, and social services, and IT. Because one of the other capacities missing was, it turns out that half the state is run off a giant spindle where people just slam paper down and they can't give you an answer to the most basic facts. Did you know that we're missing federal money for this reason? Sometimes the federal government says, if you oversample and you tell us how many Hispanics or how many minorities or how many kids are in this condition, and you just fill out one line on a piece of paper, we'll give you millions of dollars. And we've been saying, we don't want to pay for that. So some of the money we're missing is not, people think the reason we're missing this money is that it takes rocket scientists to figure out all the mechanics of how you get money from the federal government. Sure, it's race to the top, some of these are like that. Then there's the basic, you're a state and you deserve some of your money back. Could you answer a question? How many people need it in your state? Literally, how many people need that money? And our answer is, we didn't pay for the oversample, so we don't know. So other states are like, we sampled, we'll take Nevada's money. Thank you. Because if it doesn't go to us, it goes to them. That gets redistributed, and the states that didn't receive any of that resource are cut out of it, even though we're all taxpayers to the federal government, as well as to the state. So Lincy has been trying to get to, where is that happening? Where are there actual, literally points where our failure is so catastrophic, so avoidable, that it won't take that much to fix it, and it will change millions more than was ever invested in Lincy back into the state. We already think we've got some of these. We already think we've had interventions that have made a difference like that, and we'll point them out as we go through. So our goals and objectives, before I give you any of those, they're all going to be spelled out by the folks here who are going to present. And I'm not presenting as much here as I did on Brookings, so if you're sick of the Rob show, the Rob show's wrapping up. But that's just a word cloud that shows some of the areas where we're looking. This is who we are, a nice group shot at the 5th Street School. And this is actually who we think we really are. And I don't know why it's not clicking. There it goes. See, we're just regular folk. You're not just a bunch of serious people sitting there trying to audit the state, figuring out all the money we're missing. We're just looking for a good time. It's Las Vegas. Okay, so we're going to go through these categories starting with education. So Sonia Horsford is going to step up. And I'll go to your first slide, and you can have the com.
Thank you, Rob. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, well, as the education scholar, I'm often asked, how do we fix education? The question is, how do we fix schools, and how do we approach what are really deep and persistent challenges in education in Southern Nevada? And while there is no silver bullet, and we often hear that, there are many things that we can do as a state to really turn the state around and improve the type, quality, and access to education that we provide, from early childhood education all the way through college and career readiness. And so based on the work that we've done at Lincy in really identifying need and identifying the challenges in education, there's really 4 areas where we find that we can make proper investments, conduct additional research to really move the needle and help to turn Nevada around and move us from the bottom of every bad list to the top of every good list. In terms of early childhood education, there has been a lot of activity at the state level around building a system and infrastructure that will allow students, primarily those who are 3 and 4 years old, to access early learning opportunities. This is wonderful based on the fact that now at the federal level, the president has invested or has put in his budget billions of dollars for preschool for all children, and making sure that all United States children, particularly those who are most vulnerable, have access to high-quality early childhood programs and education. And so it's really critical now for Nevada to make sure that we have developed that state infrastructure and system of early childhood education to leverage those federal dollars as they become available. The Lincy Institute, fortunately, has been at the table and really working closely with the State of Nevada Early Childhood Systems Office, as well as the Southern Nevada Early Childhood Advisory Committee, to help define system readiness, determine what the field needs to look like in terms of early childhood education as a profession, which currently doesn't exist. We have a system of Head Start, public and private providers, and so using data to determine where and who actually has access to early childhood education has been challenging, but we also need to provide a data system where we can, collect that data and share it among public and private entities, and that is part of the discussion that we've been actively involved in at Lincy. And this diagram actually was a result of a session that we had that was hosted by the State Nevada Early Childhood Systems Office in defining school readiness, which ultimately resulted in a focus on system readiness. And so while we want children to be ready to attend kindergarten, ready to learn, it's important that families, that that schools, that our state has a system in place to receive these children and provide them with the quality education that they need. And sadly, Nevada nationally has the highest number of children who are 3 and 4 who do not have access to this education, which has huge implications for students as they move into kindergarten, progress through high school, and then are prepared to succeed in college. And so we had a policy brief that was published last April that has been used heavily and widely, including at this recent legislative session, to determine how we can help to build a system that gets students ready to learn early. Another issue is making sure that parents and families are engaged in education. There's been a lot of work around the Nevada Ready for Life initiative, around ensuring that the community has and demonstrates an ethic that values education, and that's something that we have sought to continue at Lincy, and making sure that everyone understands that they have a role to play in our community in improving education. And so at Lincy, we have established and did establish a family engagement work group that emerged out of a summit that we hosted with over 90 participants in partnership with the Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown University, which has a special unit that focuses on parent and community organizing to improve education. And so part of the challenge that we see in our community is a lack of voice on behalf of our parents and community stakeholders, and being able to provide a mechanism to encourage the development of community-based organizations where parents can express their concerns about the quality of school that their children attend, and the need for additional resources, and really include their voice in the debate on what we want education to look like in our state and what we're willing to do to get there. And so another example, in addition to the Family Engagement Working Group and a policy brief that we published, it was entitled The Missing Piece in Urban Education Reform, the Importance of Family Engagement. We've also worked with individuals who want to make a difference. After the Lincy Institute was established, soon after, much like Rob's experience, people would come up and say, hey, how can I help? I'm passionate about education and I want to make it better, but there really was no community-based organization that existed for them to be able to engage in that type of work. So I collected emails and basically told everyone who individually contacted me to meet together to discuss how we wanted to do this. And we brought in a facilitator from Annenberg, again, because of their knowledge base on community organizing for education, and developed a very loose group called Coalesce Clark County. And that group has met, in an informal way to discuss the education issues of the day and the ways that they can access research from Lincy and other sources to help guide and inform and shape the education discourse in Southern Nevada. And so that's been exciting because, again, we're taking research that's developed here as well as accessing existing research. There's a new policy report in education every day, just about. But getting that into the hands of the community, of stakeholders, of parents, of student activists, of those who really want to use that information to help Nevada make the right decisions in terms of developing the system and structure that we need. The last initiative, I think, is a really good example of the cross-based collaboration and cross-sector partnerships that we've developed at Lincy. It is the Las Vegas Promise Neighborhood Initiative, and in the fall of 2011, we applied for a planning grant through the U.S. Department of Education for a Promise Neighborhood grant. And this basically is a place-based initiative where a variety of community stakeholders, who often are serving the same children and families, find ways to work together to better serve those families with fewer resources, with limited time, but with the same goals in mind. And so we built this collaborative here in Southern Nevada. We did not get the grant, but I think the wonderful thing about the Lincy Institute is the fact that we were able to take the lead, to bring partners together, to apply for the grant, and really benefit from lessons learned from some of the weaknesses in the grant and also the strengths. And so we have used that, captured many of the key elements from the application, as well as the technical reviews and the lessons learned, and included them in a report that you see here, and it will be released later this month. To again chart the progress and the contribution that we've made as an institute in just helping to facilitate partnership and collaboration. And so we're hoping that someone could take this, if not us or one of the partners, and continue to build on that so that we can have a competitive and successful application in the future. And this is a list of many of the partners that we've had. We benefited from the guidance of the Promise Neighborhoods Institute at PolicyLink. We brought them out. I think this is another strength of the Lincy Institute, that we're able to use some resources to bring in experts from out of the state that have worked with communities around these same issues to help guide us and to help us think through how we as a local community want to build these collaborative partnerships. Another issue that's really important, particularly in Southern Nevada, and based on the conversation that happened today, was adequately funding our schools. And this is happening right now in terms of making sure that Clark County School District is not continuing to subsidize the rest of the state, but receiving the resources that we need to serve our students, many of whom need a bit more to receive the quality of education. So English language learners, students in poverty, as well as students with disabilities. And so it's very important that we modernize our state finance system. This is a discussion that's happening nationwide, but Nevada could really be the leader in modernizing our state funding system, making sure that it's adequate, that it's equitable, and really, again, to be this turnaround state as it relates to serving English language learners and other students who have needs. We were the only state out of all 50 states in Puerto Rico in a recent study to receive Fs in both our funding distribution and our effort. And so this means we're not only not giving enough money, but we're not giving it to the students who need it most throughout the state. And again, this issue of equity, yes, we can fund the system adequately and make sure that we fund the state adequately, but we also need to make sure that it's done equitably and that the students who need it are getting what they need to be successful. And so our hope is that for many of you who are in the room, whether you're faculty or community stakeholders, we can continue to work with you. You can share your research with us, partner with us on briefs and publications that come out of Lincy, and help us to be competitive as we seek additional federal and private dollars to improve education. Thank you. And next, I bring up Maria Shagag, who's our Director of Health Programs.
Well, good morning. I think, is it still morning? Well, as Sonia said, I'm the Director of Health Programs. I'm Maria Shagag. And health programs is a big thing to discuss because health is so wide. It's not only how we live every day, but it's also how we get care, who gets care, who provides care, where are they trained. It's a big ball, if you will. And so so often in Nevada, did I go too fast? So often in Nevada we hear about just all the things that we miss, that, Nevada has low uninsured, and we have high uninsured rates, we have poor health outcomes, we have all of these different things that just really prove to be a challenge. But there are some good things, and it's really about how do we strategize with the good things and to turn around the things that may not be as positive. So we look at policy. We want to establish policy change. We want to do community-based programs and ultimately help bring in some money, because money is one of the things that will help address some of these challenges. In the Brookings SRI report that was referred to in the first half, as it was said, they acknowledged that we're just missing a huge part of our healthcare infrastructure. That doesn't mean, that means that we don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough people, and it's just not doctors. This is one of the only states I've heard of where we actually brought people from out of the country to fill our need for nurses. So we don't have enough healthcare clinicians kind of across the board. The nurses certainly have begun to be addressed because we've had a blooming of several nursing schools in the area. But there's still need for more clinicians, more training, and then cross-sector pollination, as well as increasing the amount of, increasing the cultural competency. Because even if you have a doctor, if he doesn't know how to talk to you, then it's not really going to do any good either. So it's you have to think of it across the spectrum. And that includes, looking at novel ways to access, like the medical home. If you look, there was a speaker at the Barrick lecture recently who was talking about the medical home and how there's some things in the future that we'll probably be able to at least begin to identify ourselves, so we go to the doctor with a more complete picture. We're not going to the doctor, sitting for hours and waiting for him to tell us what's wrong. We can go in and say, hey, I have this picture, I have this data, I have this information. Now how can we work together to make it better? So that's one of the big things, looking at new pathways for treatment and identification, reducing medical tourism. first of all, people who don't have money, they can't go to California, Houston, or Phoenix to go get health care. But then the people who do have money, if they're going out of the state, not only is it an inconvenience, but it means that we're missing out on the benefits of having them in state, both economically as well as just health-wise. Because if you have to make a plan to go to your doctor and it includes a helicopter and a landing pad, then it becomes a big challenge. And I know from actually being at Texas Medical Center that they report that, you know, their helicopter pad is often used from people flying from Las Vegas to Houston to get care. So we want to change that. And so one of the things that's been talked about a lot is the whole med school. University of Las Vegas, of Nevada, Las Vegas Med School. Is it going to happen? Well, first of all, I have a real simple question. How can it not? Because, you know, the need for doctors, the need for return of investment, the diversifying of our actual economy, all could happen through the beginning of a med school and a biotech center. There's an organization, Trip Umba. Paul Umba is one of the founding members of the organization. He's been working with the Association of American Medical Colleges since about the late 70s. And he does their economic impact every 2 years. And so he has a really unique database that nobody else has. It's a proprietary, and when you read anything about economic impact and medical infrastructure, they're always using the Trip Umba formula. And the only way you can get that is by his database. So it's kind of unique. And when we reached out to them to look at maybe we can do an economic impact study here to determine how a med school could impact this area economically, he was like, yeah, you know, I did Phoenix. Wondering when y'all were going to call. There was just no shock in it because he did Phoenix. He's worked in almost every state as well as Puerto Rico doing economic impact or strategic planning for med schools that want to expand and everything else. So with that, when we called, he was like, yeah, let's get it rocking, I'm ready. And we asked him some really simple questions, and he got back to us quickly as far as the data. And so we are looking at working with him to do an economic impact, well, the organization, to do an economic impact study so that we can find out what would be the benefit, well, so we can find more concretely what are the benefits of having a med school. We also look at how can we get more data out there. There always seems to be a dearth of data when you go to write your grant. You want to paint this really pretty picture, and it's just hard to find some of the data. I'm working with Dr. Melva Thompson-Robinson and the Center for Health Disparities Research in getting some of the data out there. One of the data points we know are missing is looking at heterosexuals, especially men, and their sexual wellness. And so we're doing a special issue of the Journal of Health Disparities Research to see what's out there. And so we've actually put out a request for manuscripts all over the nation, and we're hoping to get, we're getting manuscripts in now, and we'll do it's a peer-reviewed journal, so it'll be reviewed, and we'll see what we get. Well, no, we know what we'll get, and we'll have a publication, and I'm talking too slow, so. I also work a great deal with community programs like Rob talked, Nevada Strong, which is the HUD grant, and Healthy Communities, and with First Med Health and Wellness, which is the only federally funded, federally qualified health care center in Southern Nevada. So they're called FQHCs. They bring in tons of money. In California, the FQHCs get something like $20 million. We only had one organization in Southern Nevada that got one. Actually, in the whole state that got one. And that's First Med. And so certainly helping them in continuing on. They just went up for their second round of funding. They had the primary funding. Now they're going for the second for expansion. And they serve people. FQHC is responsible to serve a large part of our uninsured population and make sure that they get care. So I'm doing that as well. I work with the Office of Diversity Initiatives, both in on things such as the Women's Council and the Black Professionals Council, and to set the agenda for fairness, because we want to attract people here. We want people here. If we get a med school, we need people to come. And if they think that there's inequities, then they may be less attracted. Also, when we look at STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, when we look at things like it's STEM, those are the people who go to become doctors and nurses and clinicians. So we need STEM. We need a strong, rigorous program, both in research and design. The first time I stepped in a lab was my freshman year. And that was what kind of pushed me on and continued me on research. So we need those opportunities as well as those monies. I worked on a federally funded grant. It was great. I got some tuition, and I got to cut off rats' heads. So, you know, go figure. But it was an opportunity that never ended. And the students get opportunities. You get to work in the community. You get to learn, and you get to understand a little bit how it works. And that's what really fuels your passion. Oh, and finally, we want to move the needle. One of the things that I found time and time again in all of the projects is that we don't have enough data, or if we do, we don't know where to find it. It's always a struggle. People say, you know, oh, I want to write this grant, but then when you go to find the number, like you can't get it at zip code level, or you can't get it at census tract level, or it's just not there. Part of it is the oversampling, like Rob talked about, with things like the BRFSS, which is the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. They don't oversample, so we don't get those monies, but also that means that we can't paint the picture the way we need to. So if you have data sets that are good and reliable, by all means, please call me, email me, send smoke signals, because we want to create a database with the wonderful help of Fatma. We want to create a database where people can come and say, this is the data I need, and we can give it, and we can give the clean data to organizations so they can paint the picture. We're working with social services and also the cities just to get the data, health-related data, but all data really, so that we can create this database. I'm done. And now we're going to hear from Ramona Denby-Brinson about social services.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As I think about the order of our talks, I don't think that it's deliberate that we had education first, health, and then social service, but it's actually perfect, because much of what occurs in the area of social service, in this town at least, is the direct result of our underinvestment in education, or a lack of response within health. Stated differently, a lot of the work that I do and my colleagues do within the social service sector is pick up the pieces when education hasn't worked, or help those families when they haven't been able to access health care. And so a lot of what we do at the Lindsay Institute, we talk about these four sectors as though they're distinct, but they're so interrelated. Social service is education. Social service is health. And thanks to the help of Fatma, social service is actually now information technology too. So we have a nice synergy that's going on within our sectors. I just want to share a little bit, as you've heard us talk throughout the morning, and Rob express the mission of the Lincy Institute. A lot of what we do is advocacy, and that advocacy takes the form of policy work, advocacy through research. Within the social service sector, a lot of our advocacy comes through capacity building. We work extensively with social service nonprofits to increase their ability to have an impact on some of the most vulnerable families within Clark County. And so I'll highlight a couple of our collaborations that we have started within the past 2 years, and also share with you how we structure the collaborations and the purpose of our overall work. What we've been doing in addressing many of the issues of social service issues is literally convening key leaders from both within the campus and the local community. And at the forefront of all of our work is always this common thread, and that is our interest in improving the lives and the conditions of some of the most vulnerable children and families within the Valley. As I move forward with some of these collaborations, I think what becomes really important about this particular sector is I think we've been very effective in actually tapping some of the best leaders within the campus here. We work with faculty in education, faculty in liberal arts, faculty in urban affairs, and we've integrated the work of the faculty with the community. As I'm in the community oftentimes, the question that I get, kind of different from Sonia's question, is, please tell me how UNLV can be relevant to what we do. You know, Ramona, it's great that you guys do all this wonderful research, and we love the students that you send to us in terms of practicums, But we really want to work with the university, but we've got to be able to make that work matter. And within our sector, making the work matter is vitally important. It actually means people's lives. It means their freedom. We work with partners who are dealing with very, very, very complicated issues. We're dealing with children that are caught up generationally in child and family service systems, such as foster care, such as the juvenile justice system. We're dealing with issues that are so profound to people's just day-to-day well-being, mental health conditions, for example. And so as I thought about that question, the question of relevance, the question of UNLV's relevance to many of these social service issues, I thought that the best approach would be to convene these partnerships, because we can't do this work alone. You know, we like to think that we bring the intellectual capacity to this, but guess what? The providers do too. They know these issues oftentimes better than we do. And so we've actually been struggling within what becomes our role? How are we relevant? And how is our work useful? And so we have decided as a group of collaborators that everything that we do has to be a practical initiative. It has to be something where we're going to begin to see outcomes immediately for children and families. And our second purpose is that everything that we do, it has to be able to leverage into larger projects. And so if we're able to establish an initiative with any of these issues around social services, it has to go beyond a 5-year demonstration. We have to see lasting, sustainable impact that helps children and families in future generations. So that becomes our driving force. 2 collaborations I want to highlight. We have so many, but we're especially proud of these 2 collaborations. We've put together what we think is a pretty effective mental and behavioral health collaborative. This collaborative is actually led by our very own faculty, Dr. Sandra Owens with the School of Social Work, the Cannon Center, Pam Gallion, people over in the College of Education. We have a large membership of faculty that are working on this initiative. And what we've been doing in the Lindsay Institute across all of our sectors is we, on a daily basis, we track the forecast of federal funding with the help of Senator Reed's office. And we are privileged to be able to have key leadership from his office work with us on these issues. So we literally track the money that's coming down through the Affordable Care Act. And as many of you know, just keeping up with the daily news, mental health is big here. And I don't want to get into the gun debate and all the things that have happened around mental health issues, but we know that that's a huge issue for us. And it's no surprise to this audience that our mental health system in Clark County is woefully underdeveloped, be it children's mental health or adult mental health. And so we've put together this collaborative where we're trying to position Clark County to be able to receive a lot of that funding. And what we know, Rob talked this morning, that sometimes the problem with the federal pass-through is that we're not filling out the paperwork. But actually, to be honest, sometimes we're not competitive. We don't have the data. We can't tell our story. So we're trying to get ahead of that problem as we know that the money is coming through the Affordable Care Act, particularly around mental health. And we're doing some data mining with respect to our mental health outcomes. We've put together a collaborative, 22 agencies. And so we're big at the Lincy Institute of really sharing the burden, sharing the work, you know, that we all have to have some skin in this game. And so we're proud of this particular collaborative because it's 22 active agencies, not just people whose names look good on paper, but agencies such as Mojave Mental Health, Clark County Social Services, the state, people that have really rolled up their sleeves and come to the table to really address a lot of the mental health issues. And we are putting together an assessment. We are in the second year of that assessment. Just quickly, 3 components. We will actually do a household survey, random digit dialing to residents in Clark County here to find out about mental health of residents. We're also looking at workforce because a lot of the Affordable Care Act money will strengthen the workforce and we need that service here. And then we're actually looking at the consumers of services, asking about quality of care, access to care. Have you been able to access psychiatrists? Have you been able to access clinicians? We're very hopeful about that data set with the help of Fatma, who you're going to hear from in a second, being able to make those data then available to the nonprofits. Because if we collect all this data, it does us no good if we keep the data here on Maryland Parkway. The data has to be available to the providers in the community who are going to be the people to compete for this funding. And so that's a huge part of what we're doing. They're at the table. They're telling us what indicators matter. They're telling us how they want to use the data. And because we're connected to our federal partners in DC, we know how to craft the data so that we're going to be successful for the next round of mental health money that's coming through the ACA. Second example, this one happens to be from the field of child welfare. And I just want to, I know we're not supposed to mention names because we're going to forget people, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention our wonderful research team here in the social service sector that are sitting over here about 4 rows back, because they are critical to this child welfare initiative, and that's Tondra, Sarah, and Lorena. We have been working with the Clark County Department of Family Services and a host of probably a dozen other providers around the issue of how are the children. As we come together, any convening, this is always a question at the forefront of our minds. How are the children? If we had to answer that question today, or actually when we started this initiative 2 years ago, the answer, the news, would not have been very great. We know that most of our children that are caught up in the foster care and juvenile justice system don't graduate from high school. They become pregnant or become parents far too soon. They get intermingled with the juvenile justice system. They start a lifetime of involvement into the adult criminal justice system. Their mental health is impacted. They eventually become use substances. And so the answer to that question today, how are the children, is not a very good response. So what we've done with respect to this issue, again, teaming with Clark County Department of Family Services, we put together a collaborative, and we benefited from their partnership. And we said, what can we do? We're the 4th highest in the nation in teen pregnancy. We're the 3rd highest in the number of African American and Latino children that are removed from their home and that literally grow up in the foster care system. And what the Lincy Institute did, we framed the problem. We articulated the argument, we pulled the data, and we said, hey, you guys, did you know there's money available for this? So again, back to Rob's point, federal pass-through is a problem because we can't fill out forms, but the other problem is we can't compete. We've got to be able to compete. And the benefit of a university to our partners in the community is that we can do that. We can help conceptualize the problem, gather the data. We are very happy to report that we have been successful in this effort. The Children's Bureau awarded us $2.5 million for the next 5 years to work within the field of foster care. And the neat thing about this collaborative, too, not just that, the population that it will address, but it's actually a good demonstration of how the outreach into the community works. We structure the budget so that direct services will receive 85% of the money. So the services will go directly to the caregivers and the children, and 15% of that money will come back to UNLV to support the research. And so it's a collaborative that works for everyone because we're providing services to the children, but we're also building our research infrastructure here on campus as well. These are some of our partners. As great as the Lincy Institute is, I don't want to take all the credit for a lot of the success we've had around the acquisition of federal grant money. You see, we've had some very vital partners in this effort. As I begin to wrap up, again, the question always at the forefront for us, how are the children? How are the children? With that, we've put together a pretty successful advisory board. The advisory board is an 11-member advisory board, literally comprised of the CEOs and directors from every major social service agency here in Clark County. So we've got Catholic Charities, we've got Clark County Social Services, we've got the Jewish Federation, we've got 3 Square. So all the people who are out there in the trenches doing this work every day at the table with us. We've just wrapped up our strategic plan, and in reaction to the question, how are the children, we've laid out an initiative where we're going to issue a call for collaborations, call for convenings, call for research demonstrations, white papers, and infrastructure and capacity building. So ultimately, when we ask that question, how are the children, we hope to get to this answer: the children are well. Thank you. And now Dr. Fatma Nassus is going to come up and talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing in the area of information technology.
Thank you, Ramona, and thank you all for coming. Today I'm going to talk about our efforts in information technology as it relates to all the areas that my wonderful colleagues talked about. So as we all know, information technology is a crucial component of every successful business, every sophisticated business. IT-driven companies that have been able to take advantage of take advantage of the ever-growing, exponential growing computing resources were the ones who were most successful in the recent decades. But why is IT so important? It is important because it allows us to create information as well as information exchange. And information is critical for for-profit businesses, but it's also equally indispensable for nonprofits and government agencies. So knowing that at the Lincy Institute, we asked ourselves this question: do our nonprofits and government agencies utilize information technology to its fullest potential so that they can operate with greatest social impact? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. And this is a problem. So we realize this is a problem and would like to be a part of the solution by promoting and enabling high-impact, low-cost information technology adoption for our nonprofits and community partners. So to that end, I'm going to talk about some of the initiatives we're leading at the Lincy Institute, and you will see, I hope you will see that the common thread in all of those initiatives is collaboration, whether it's at UNLV or it's in the community. So the first example I'm going to give you is an example of collaboration at UNLV, among others. We have submitted an ITEST proposal to the National Science Foundation, and ITEST stands for Innovative Technology Experiences for Students and Teachers. And we are asking for $1.2 million in order to implement a program where we advance math education in two of our elementary schools, where through an innovative state-of-the-art and visual learning technology. So Sonia and I actually work with faculty from UNLV's Department of Teaching and Learning, principals from 100 Academy of Excellence and Paradise Elementary School, and researchers from two highly prestigious institutes that are external research institutes. And we're hoping to find out about the review results within this month. The next example is an example of a community partnership where we're working, and we've launched a project with two of our nonprofits where we're helping them to use this database and use this system so that they can keep track of their partners, their contacts, their donations, and create reports. And we help them to apply for donation for this system, and then we're helping them. We continue to work with them through implementation. I'd like to say the products were donated to these two nonprofits at 100% by the donor, and it's worth $15,000 per year per organization. And finally, I would like to talk about two information technology solutions that involve data. The first one is the Lincy collaboration system that we developed that keep tracks of UNLV faculty and staff's involvement in the community through their projects and programs. And this system we developed, and the reason that the motivation behind this system is that we match the UNLV's expertise with the community's need. So to that extent, we invite and welcome all of your contributions to this database. And what we did was, once we developed this database, we shared it with our colleagues at the Office of Research, Office of the Provost, and the Office of Civic Engagement, and we were really happy to find out they're really enthusiastic about it too. And finally, the last project I'm going to talk about is the data repository. And the motivation behind that is we have an abundance of data in our community. It's not the lack of data, but the problem is that data is usually not in a shareable or in an analyzable format. So, and the data is really meaningless unless we convert it, turn it into information. So, as information is very important in the decision-making process, we see our role at the Lincy Institute as taking the data from the community and giving it back as information. So what we'll do is we're launching this initiative where we're creating a data repository that's running on the database that will store our health, education, and social services data in the community. Allow the community to provide their data into the system and get back and share data with the others. And in that sense, they can use it to write grants, measure return on investment, measure failure and success, and also make future projections. And I would like to end with one of my favorite quotes, which is said by the founder of information theory, Claude Shannon. He said, information is the resolution of uncertainty. So that's what we're hoping for our community. Thank you. With that, I turn to Lucy.
Thank you, Fatma. True to his word, Rob is going to share this stage, and we have a few more presentations to share with you this morning. Campus engagement. You've just heard from our scholars, and how lucky am I to work with these four? Can we give them another round? Thank you so much. But it's my privilege to introduce you to another group of university partners, the recipient of our Research Fellowship Awards. Many of them are here this morning. Kathleen Berquist, Beau Bernard, Monica Lounsbury, Gwen Michant, and Nancy Mensel. But the Institute also selected one team award, and that happens to be one with a research topic that is very significant to the news these days, not only nationally, but also locally. The team award was given to Leanne Putney, Ralph Reynolds, Sylvia Lazos, and we've asked Leanne to represent the program and to share a few words about her team's work and their ongoing research this morning. Leanne?
Good morning, everybody. It's a privilege to be here. And we have the clicker. I may need the clicker. Almost 2 years ago today, to this date, we culminated our Lincy project with a full-day seminar at the Stan Fulton building where we brought together people who knew about the needs of our students, especially our most vulnerable students who are English language learners and children of poverty. And so I wanted to show you what we presented, and this was our final sort of results from that project. We started to see what the needs are for academic success. And a lot of times people say, we don't know what we need to fix schools. And my answer is, yes, we do. We know what needs to be done. But policymakers need to listen to the people in the trenches who know what needs to be done. So it really starts with our instructional leaders and our teachers and principals and staff members in our schools who are valued people who are working towards educational success. We need to be able to support those folks so that they can do their job and improve our schools. But also, policymakers need to hear the voices of those instructional leaders. If policy people don't listen, then instructional leaders keep working, but the policy people need to also really understand what's going on, and they need to have policy that's conducive for success instead of impeding success. Along with that, we need to have the best kind of professional development that we can have. And our College of Ed folk have been working with Clark County School District, and we're starting to implement more professional development. And we want to be able to build on strengths of our teachers so that we provide the best for our students as well. Along with professional development, we need parental involvement, but we need to do it in a way that is conducive to the parents also. And schools have to reach out to parents. It's our job to make sure that parents are welcome in the schools. Along with that, we need to have the best research in order to facilitate the best curriculum and finding the best teaching strategies. So that's another area that we're working on in the College of Ed and with colleagues across the nation. I just came back from the AERA conference where we saw all kinds of new information on researching in education. And finally, we need community involvement. And the community partnerships are crucial for education, not to direct and tell schools what to do, but to help provide those resources, not only monetary, but the personal resources that you've all shared this morning. You've done a fabulous job of showing what community involvement can do. So return on investment, where are we going from here? Both ends of the spectrum, we did a Go to College NSHE grant, and in spring of 2013, we had 4 Clark County high schools represented, where we had 4 graduate students going in tutoring. They tutored on skill development, time management, getting them ready for college in terms of finances and working with the parents on financial education. We're adding a parent component to that in the fall. The Reading Skills Development Consortium, we've taken CCSD master teachers. They're working with UNLV pre-service teachers as reading tutors. Our school psychology interns are doing specific directed assessment to be able to best tell what it is that those children need that are having reading difficulties. There's an ELL component that'll be added in fall 2013, but there's new current legislation right now in AB 222 to fund this consortium so that we can connect also with Northern Nevada. And then finally, we're working with the CCSD English Language Learners Committee, and we're working on a principals professional development, and we'll be rolling that out in summer and fall. So that's where we are today.
We have another set of partners that we'd like to introduce with the current work underway, and we'd like for Rob to introduce these three.
We're running a bit behind, so I don't want to take any time. Just to say, these three research awards are ongoing. In other words, they're not complete yet. You'll just get a sample out of them, and they're all related, and I don't have the time to go into the sort of logic and cohesion behind them, but they do add to a bigger than the sum of the parts. So I want to get Shannondale right here, right now, and we'll get a few slides out of each research project, and you'll see where we're heading.
Thank you, Rob, and I'd like to thank the Lincy Institute and, of course, Rob for funding this project, and all of the scholars have been really helpful, and Lucy has been amazing. And I'd also like to acknowledge my graduate assistant, Anna Smedley, who is here, who helped do a lot of the data collection and entry for this particular project. So over the past several months, we've been conducting a network analysis of health, education, and social service-related nonprofits in Clark County. And the purpose of this was to help describe the nonprofit network structure, identify the leaders of the most influential organizations in the network, and also identify some of the barriers to collaboration among the nonprofit network. So in total, we received 300 surveys back from these nonprofit organizations, and within those 300 surveys, 465 organizations were identified as collaborations. And so what I'm about to show you are the very preliminary sort of teaser results of this analysis, and there'll be more later. So yeah, cool, right? It looks even better than it was on my little monitor. But so this is a sociogram that shows all of the connections among the 465 organizations that were identified in our surveys. The red are the private nonprofit organizations, the blue are the government-related nonprofits, the pink are the funders, and the green are the faith-based. And you can see that the private organizations represent sort of the largest proportion of nonprofit organizations within the network. The size of the circles represent the number of connections that each organization has. And so we can sort of see that the most connected networks are United Way, Clark County School District, Help of Southern Nevada, Three Square, Catholic Charities, and of course, UNLV. So there are a number of ways to describe this sort of cohesiveness or collaboration within a network. One of those is to determine how many ties each organization has. And on average, each of the organizations who responded to us have about 10 connections. Overall, because this is such a large network, it would appear that it's pretty dense. There are lots of lines going back and forth, but in reality, one of the statistics for cohesion, the density score, is only about 2%, which indicates only about 2% of all possible connections that could exist do exist. That's not all that surprising, given that this is a large network, and the larger that the network is, the less cohesive in terms of density it tends to be. But even more telling are the statistics for the diameter and the average path length. So the diameter, when it's really small, indicates a very cohesive network. A diameter of 8 is quite large. It indicates that at least one organization has to go through 8 paths just to get to another organization. And that's even larger than the sort of 6 degrees of separation that we think of. But then the average path length is over 3, which indicates on average organizations have to go through 3 paths or 2 other organizations to get to another one. So we could use some work on the cohesiveness and the collaboration among the nonprofit network. I wanted to show you UNLV's EGO network. So in addition to sort of describing the whole nonprofit network in Southern Nevada, we can also describe the network of an individual organization and how well connected they are to others. And so there are several reasons that I chose to present UNLV's network. Obviously, we're here, I'm here. And so I thought it would be a good way to describe how much work and how important UNLV is to the nonprofit community. So UNLV has 60 connections, which is the 6th highest among all of the nonprofit organizations in the network. And in fact, if I were to include the Lincy Institute and the Women's Center in this count, it would be the largest. It would be the most connected organization among all of them, even more connected than the United Way, by the way, which is designed to build connections, right? There are a number of organizations that have a lot fewer connections, obviously. University of Nevada, Reno Cooperative Extension comes to mind. They only have 4, which is sort of comparable to Sin City Sisters Perpetual Indulgence, which is another organization that only has 4 connections in Southern Nevada. So another way that we can think about how important an organization is not just how many connections do you have, but how many connections do the people you're connected with have? Sort of how cool are your friends, right? And UNLV has really cool friends. It has the 7th highest eigenvector centrality score, which is a measure of how connected your buddies are. And then another way to think about connection is what we call betweenness centrality. If your organization is between other disconnected organizations, that puts you in a position of power. You are an intermediary. UNLV is a really important intermediary. It has the 5th highest score on that particular measure, which indicates that UNLV can be a broker of information, a broker of connections. Finally, there's a measure of closeness that indicates how independent an organization is. And UNLV has the 7th highest closeness score. It's really important to be close, because if you're close to a lot of organizations, what that means is that you don't have to rely on other intermediaries for your information. You can be the broker. You can be the people who bring people together. So ultimately, UNLV is really important to the nonprofit community in Southern Nevada, and we can act as a broker between other organizations. So in terms of lessons learned, we now know which organizations have potential influence, which organizations are the most connected in Southern Nevada. These are the organizations that UNLV and the Lincy Institute can turn to help build collaborations. We now know how cohesive the nonprofit network is, and the reality is it's not very cohesive. So those organizations that have the highest scores on the measures that we've found can be brought together to build collaborations within the network. And we also asked executive directors what were the barriers to collaboration among the nonprofit networks. And the most common ones that came up were time constraints, lack of shared vision, reluctance to share resources. And these things came out most clearly in some comments that we received back, which reflected competitiveness among organizations in the nonprofit network. There were lots of terms used like territoriality. People don't want to share resources. People are competing for funding. And so ultimately, UNLV can work with these organizations to find ways to share resources and to help build the ability of the nonprofits to both serve their clients and also successfully compete for federal and foundational grant funding. So more to come. And now I'd like to introduce Jessica Word, who will talk more about nonprofits.
Good morning. Let me tell you just a little bit. I usually normally study the actual management of nonprofit organizations, so this was sort of a brand new sort of task for me. I really thank my co-authors, Jaewon Lim and Carol Servino, who is a PhD student who is graduating in May. But, you know, it's official. She's turned everything in. And Kenneth Lang, my other research assistant, for their help with this project. So, nationally, nonprofits make out about 10.1% of all private employment in the country. They've been sort of growing and growing since the 1960s and 70s. And it sort of picked up pace as we started contracting out a lot of things to the nonprofit sector that used to be government things. So in Nevada, they paid about almost $2 billion in wages last year. Or in 2011, when I started this, it was last year. And this means about 43,000 jobs in Nevada on average in that year. In comparison to other industries, nonprofits were the 9th largest employer in the state of Nevada. Larger than some others that you would expect to be bigger based on their political strength, such as mining, real estate, finance, and manufacturing. The average nonprofit employee in 2011 earned about $45,000 a year. Oh, I'm not talking to the microphone. I'm used to lecture hall where I just walk around. So what does that translate into? So Nonprofits are about half the size of government in terms of their production, in terms of the gross regional product for our state. So that means about 5.5% of all economic activity comes from the nonprofit sector. And so this data is actually from 2010 because we had to match it to other data. In 2010, about 1,531 nonprofit organizations contributed to that gross regional product. This is equivalent to $7.1 billion every year in the state of Nevada. And the average nonprofit employee in 2010 actually did better than the one in 2011, with about $47,235 annually in wages. We think the decline probably has something to do with the expiration of federal stimulus dollars. For every 100 nonprofit jobs in the state, we get an extra 66 jobs in the state every year. So that's a pretty good multiplier. And this is basically the ripple effect from each new employee going out and spending money and each organization spending money in their community. We have also found a lot of regional differences in terms of nonprofits and their scope in the state. We divided the state into basically 3 regions. Southern Nevada, which is, we just used Clark County. Northern Nevada, which we used Carson City, Story County, and Reno, or Washoe County. And so Clark County is a major, in Southern Nevada, nonprofits contribute about 4% of our gross regional product here just in Southern Nevada. That's equivalent to about $3.6 billion annually spent here in the region. And the share for nonprofits is approximately 40% of government activities here in Southern Nevada. Now, when we go north, this looks really different. A total of 516 nonprofits in Northern Nevada contributed 11.4% to the gross regional product in Northern Nevada. This is equivalent to $2.9 billion, which includes direct, indirect, and induced impacts. And this is despite the fact that most of the philanthropic giving in the state actually occurs here in Southern Nevada, not in the north. So we think this has to do a lot with sort of the relationship between state government and federal government and spending up into the northern part of the state. The other sort of significant difference we found was that there were more nonprofit healthcare entities in Northern Nevada when we compared them to Southern Nevada. So this sort of echoes a lot of what we heard this morning. And nonprofits in Northern Nevada are about 77% of the share of government activities. So they're almost as large as government in Northern Nevada. And their average annual wage in Northern Nevada is also higher than the state average at $51,000. Or about $5,000 higher than the wage down here. So we're obviously still working through a lot of this data, but we're getting very close. So I just knew we had only a few minutes, so I wanted to share these few findings. And now I'm going to welcome Cindy Ortiz Gustafson to come up.
Thank you. So Nevada has been failing dramatically at the federal funding game for a long time, decades actually. We know this, in fact, it has become such a common conversation in academia and even in some community meetings, actually, it's translated that far, that we think that it's actually become part of a Nevada narrative, which is sad. Together with the leadership of the Lincy Institute and the Brookings Institution, we are conducting research, piloting projects, and beginning to mobilize the public and private resources needed to change the course and to chart a new incredible path for our state with this issue. I'd like to thank Rob Lang and the Lincy Institute for this opportunity to be part of this change. My name is Cindy Ortiz Gustafson. I'm the CEO of Strategic Progress, which is a Nevada policy and research consulting firm. Over the last 9 months, my research analyst, Jennifer Ouellette, and I traversed the state of Nevada interviewing researchers, elected officials, state department heads, nonprofit leaders, and we asked them a lot of questions about why this was happening. We pulled USA Spending and Census Bureau data with the goal of developing a detailed understanding of why Nevada was failing so badly in bringing federal funding into the state. One quick question, my clicker. Oh, okay, thank you. The preview that I'm going to go through right now is actually just a few slides, 3 in fact, of a 55-page PowerPoint. So I'm going to try to just give you the highlights. Rob told me that he wanted the problem, the answers, and all the solutions in 3 slides. So I'm going to try to appease him. The first slide tells us one very important thing. It tells us that we rank 51st out of 50 states and the territories of Puerto Rico and Guam in bringing in federal dollars to our state. In other words, we're dead last. This kind of performance doesn't happen overnight. This is something you work really hard for, and so we can feel good about that. Yes. This is something that I think other people might envy if it were a different statistic. In 2012, being dead last meant that in comparison to our Western neighbors only, not the East, not the high performers, not the pretty girls, only New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona, we left more than $1.5 billion, with a B, on the table in federal funds. For more than 10 years now, so more than a decade, we have ranked dead last or near last in this category, largely due to our Medicaid match. In 2012 alone, that Medicaid match made up $1 billion of the lost $1.5 billion that we left on the table, again, only compared to the Western states. Had we compared ourselves to other high performers, we would have been talking billions and billions left on the table. So when we say how much did we leave on the table, $1.5 billion roughly when compared to the Western states, billions and billions, Carl Sagan style, compared to the rest of the U.S. The obvious thing about being last means that we have failed in epic proportions to compete for and win federal funds in any meaningful way. We failed to bring back money that is rightfully ours and that would have benefited our citizens in our state. We have failed due to structural, match, and capacity issues that I don't have time to get into today because of time constraints, but that we will get into when we present our heftier research in the fall. I like props too, Rob. I brought mine up with me. We've also failed due to deeply rooted cultural issues that cause the majority of our key informants to tell us that they simply lack the resources and the leadership and often, quite frankly, the motivation to tackle this problem. They said that they can't even manage to deal with this or even start to address it due to hemorrhaging state staff and lean program budgets. And as a state, quite frankly, at the end of the day, after 9 months of studying this and interviewing and crossing all over from stem to stern, we found that literally for Nevadans, it looks like it's just been too difficult for us to learn the ropes and to figure this out. Too difficult to compete even when we are primed for the federal money. As Rob said earlier, and Dr. John Hudak from the Brookings Institution pointed out, Nevada is a high-growth region. We have high need due to the recent downturn in the economy where we were hardest hit. We're a swing state and home to a Senate Majority Leader. Yet we have failed to leverage this trifecta of opportunity to even keep up with our Western neighbors. Add to that the demoralizing fact that in some cases, we were told, even when the feds wanted to literally give us the money, we failed to bring in the dollars simply because we didn't fill out the forms that would allowed them to give it to us. What dollar figure will motivate us out of what can only be called apathy or acceptance of this situation? Is $1.5 billion enough? 2.5 enough? Is the 1.5 over 10 years enough? At 15 billion? If we fall behind Puerto Rico and Guam and maybe American Samoa, is that going to be enough to put a call out to action, to mobilize resources and tackle this, to even legislate change if necessary? It's funny, but it's actually tragic. And we have to question if we were a school parent and our child was 50th or 51st, what would any of us do? And yet as a state, we've allowed this to happen. And so from a culture of accountability standpoint, you wonder who's been watching the store. As we speak again this year, for every dollar Nevada pays in federal taxes, the federal government will send us about 67 cents back. The other 33 cents will work very hard this year, building bridges in Cuyahoga County, dams in Louisiana, and roads in Miami, maybe even a few new university campuses in East Texas. In other words, it's working very hard for government anywhere and everywhere but here. This inability to bring in discretionary formula and block grant dollars to Nevada has crippled our ability to grow our economy, to educate our children, and to provide state-of-the-art health care, and to move up the ranks in many of the quality of life indicators in which we are known to trail the rest of the country. I would not dare to stand in front of a room full of scholars like you and say that there is a direct causality between being dead last and bringing in federal money and our dismal quality of life indicators. I'm not that brave. But I would ask the question, how far would that $1.5 billion have gone last year alone in addressing our state's problems? Slide 2. So let's take Medicaid out of the discussion for a minute, since it made up about $1 billion of the $1.5 billion we left on the table last year. And Governor Sandoval expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act in late 2012, changing the game. If we did just as well, not even better because we don't want to set the bar too high, seeing as we're 53rd essentially today, if we did just as well as our neighboring western states did in 2012 on average in bringing in federal funding from the Department of Health, Department of Health and Human Services, Transportation, Education, Energy, and HUD, we would have generated an additional $529 million alone last year. And remember, we're not even dreaming to compare ourselves to any of the high-performing states. This is just a keeping up with the Joneses western states comparison. That $25 million is money we could aggressively go after today. There is literally no reason that we could find in any of our research not to bring that money back home. It's as much Nevada's as anyone else's. We've just been technically lending it to Poughkeepsie, Boise, and St. Louis all this time, interest-free, but there's really no reason to dwell on that, so we might as well move on. Slide 3. And as for Southern Nevada, this is not the end of the bad news. For Southern Nevada, the impact of our federal grant problem is even bigger, and it costs us even more. And that is because the way federal funds are distributed across the state once they come in to our great state of Nevada. Slide 3 tells us a couple of things. First, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, Washoe County makes up about 16% of the state's population and received 19% of federal grant expenditures in 2010, while Clark County makes up 71% of the state's population, yet it only received 40% of federal grant expenditures in 2010. So while Washoe is receiving funding proportional to its population or a little bit in excess, the South is severely underfunded federally per capita. As you can see on this slide, Carson City's income of $19,667 per 1,000 residents is clearly an outlier due to Carson being the capital and the seat of state government. The two comparable counties that we are really looking at here are Washoe and Clark in terms of their size, although Clark dwarfs Washoe. Washoe receives $1,664 per 1,000 residents, and Clark receives only $772 per 1,000 residents. The difference is shocking, unexplained, and unsustainable. If you could do some simple math and translate those lost dollars into found dollars for the South, you're looking at millions of dollars that would provide needed services. This slide tells us that there's more research that needs to be done to understand how this kind of massive inequality has happened and been sustained over time, and how this funding that's going into Carson City right now is being distributed across the state. It also tells us that leadership is required now, today, at this time, from the South in order to ensure that moving forward, federal dollars are allocated across the state proportionally based on population. They came into the state based on the population driven from the South, but they surely are not being delivered here. Because this is what we know. First, that a robust and competitive federal funding infrastructure across the state benefits the entire state. And second, that a strong South equals a strong Nevada. These 2 points are indisputable and change is required. As we look at this data, a few things are fairly clear. First, we're in big trouble. And second, solutions are required. In order to begin to provide the logic for a path forward, we will begin a project this year in partnership with the Nevada State Health Division, the State Department of Mental Health, and the Lincy Institute to conduct a formative analysis of the barriers to successful federal funding of one state agency and to demonstrate the ability of that agency to compete for federal funds. We will demonstrate the return on investment that comes from removing those barriers, and we will show the health and cost savings that come from leveraging funds to develop, scale, and strengthen programs and infrastructure at state and local levels. So what is to be done as a broader community to address such a massive problem? It is my hope for you that you will lead as scholars and researchers together with elected officials, philanthropists, and the business community to chart and prioritize a credible path out of this morass. We look to your research, insights, and ability to provide models, evaluation, and formative analyses of some of the barriers we identified in our research to move us forward as actual competitors instead of bystanders in the federal funding game. We must also collectively build a case for investing in a knowledge economy around this issue and own the fact that this is our game to lose. We need to invest in success and in building a new Nevada narrative that is based on our willingness to innovate and seed new ideas and grow local talent and brand ourselves as a smart investment. For a city of people who built an entire economy on going big or going home, this is something we can surely do. We can play the game. We can own the game, actually, if we set our minds to it. It's what we do. It's what Las Vegas is known for. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Jess and Shannon. And may I remind you, those are just teaser presentations. We expect to have a full presentation in the fall, so stay tuned. Now, we need to fast track this program, and we're going
to go all the way to the panel because we had cool stuff. We're doing pretty well in a couple of categories, but we're late. So here we are.
Next time, next time,
keep
next
going.
time,
We had
next time.
Next time.
Look at all our
More
community partners next time.
Yep. Yeah. And
We
the
might
buzz is sad.
have a word about this at the end, but let's do our panel.
Let's do the panel, and then I'll back up to the buzz, which is good stuff. And do we have the like? Okay. Just 2 seconds on the reason for this panel. These are the founders, and we wanted to get the folks who are the principals in bringing Brookings and Lincy together. Are you good? We're on?
This works.
And we wanted to get a couple of quick points out of these folks, which is, how they see things proceeding, where they see us going, where they encourage us to go, and how they think that, they can continue to play a role in their part of the community. And these are all famous folks here. Brian Greenspun over there, Greenspun Media, Lindy Schumacher, and of course the president of the university. So I don't want to take any more time. I want you guys get going. And the first question being, where do you think we ought to go? Given what you've just seen, given the sort of whole layout of the Brookings Institution and the Lincy Institute and our research agendas and what data we have, what's our next steps from your perspective? Start with Brian over there.
Thank you, Rob. Good morning. I can't talk that fast. I certainly can't think this fast. So if I can, to try to set the tone here, let me back up a little bit, because I think before you can figure out how fast you're going forward, you got to figure out how slow you were going backwards, if that makes any sense. And I'm reminded of an old biblical story of a young man who's planting an oak tree. You've all heard it. And his friend comes and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm planting an oak tree." It was about this big. He says, "Are you crazy?" He says, "What for?" He says, "Well, it's going to provide shelter and shade for my family." He said, "But you'll never live to see this oak tree grow up so it can provide shelter and shade." He says, "I know that." He says, "But my grandchildren will, and they will get the shelter and they will get the shade." And I always think of that story when I think about Las Vegas. I've been here for a very, very long time. I've watched a lot of people dig up oak trees instead of plant them. And a number of years ago, when my family had an opportunity to first help start the Hank Greenspun School of Journalism and then later the College of Urban Affairs, it dawned on me that this was the oak tree, at least in my view, for Las Vegas, for Southern Nevada, because later on as we got this wonderful opportunity, fortunately pre-crash, to help build this beautiful building that we're in. It became very, very clear that this oak tree was not only going to provide shade and shelter at UNLV, but it was going to provide shade and shelter across the street into the community. And spending the time here this morning and listening what Brookings Mountain West has done, and clearly what Lincy Institute is doing, it is reaching across the street, metaphorically, into the entire community, which is exactly, in my view, what the role of UNLV needs to be and has to be going forward. And so what I've heard today, and I'm pretty sure most of, if not all of you will agree, is what in the last few years has been this incredible momentum toward growing up. Las Vegas has been, for a long, long time, just this awkward teenager trying to figure out what it wants to be when it grows up. Now we have the people and we have the resources and we have the information, the data points, the information, whatever it takes to say, now that we know what we want to be when we grow up, which is a world-class city, we now have the tools, not only at UNLV, but to reach across the street shout it from the rooftops. I hated that last slide that you left up here where we were the last one. Of course, I hate all those slides. You know, from my view going forward, from the media group's perspective, what we're going to do is shout that to the rooftops. To me, it's not a once-a-year program that comes out. This is an everyday deal. We don't have the time, in my view, to waste another year waiting for these reports. I know it takes a while, but we can be reporting them on an ongoing basis and stirring up the pot, because what the work you're doing is just incredible. And again, it's because of Lincy, and frankly, the two people sitting here, and I have to include Rob, of course, are the ones that made this happen. You know, I had an idea a number of years ago when I got on the board at Brookings that, my God, Brookings should be sitting in Las Vegas, not in Washington. And just through this confluence of events and a lot of luck and some brilliant, brilliant leadership, we got Brookings out here, which brought Lincy out here. And sure enough, this building that I had envisioned with the College of Urban Affairs houses Lincy and Brookings, which is reaching across the street and making all of us not only look better, but enabling us to act better. And so I see a really bright future, and hopefully it won't take another 25 years, because I don't know if I'm going to be here to see it. I'd love to be here to see it. Maybe I'll do two things. I'll be here to see it, and you'll get it done a lot sooner. So thank you very much.
Well, if I had to look back 3 years ago and see the data, I always knew it. We were a donor state. I'd hear it from Senator Reid, who's a family friend, and I always knew we gave more than we received. It was just obvious. What highlighted it was that inside our state, we were a donor community, and that wasn't okay any longer. You know, we made so much money. It wasn't a matter of like, oh, is the North taking more than the South? We were the gaming industry. We'll just pay our own bills. But look at the hole it got us in. I'm mad when I see the data, and I always knew it. I get very angry. I'll be honest. I get just flat out pissed off that we're so lazy that we let this happen to ourselves. And I know we always try and, you know, focus on the fact that, you know, we've made what we have and look at who we are. But we've also made this hole for ourselves. And I think, quite frankly, there's a tad bit of shame attached to that, because we have no one to blame but ourselves. Do we blame a governor? Do we blame our senators? Or do we blame ourselves? Because I didn't have the data, but I always knew it. So how many other people were sitting in my shoes saying, it just doesn't feel like it makes any sense? If I look back on the last 3 years, I had a plan in my head, and I would say to Rob Lang, I'd say, and what is this, a 3-year plan? It's more like a 10. And I'm like, I don't have 10. Make it a 3. And I think the Lincy Institute and the Brookings and Brookings Mountain West have done that. I think we can look at the last 3 years and say it was a game-changing 3 years. Even if you think, you know, Brookings Mountain West opened its doors, and minutes later we had our first legislative session. And for the first time we said to the people in Nevada, Southern Nevada, we're watching you. How you vote will actually come back and get you later. So pay some attention. That was a game changer alone. I mean, just making people accountable for the way they vote and act, and then they come back to Summerlin and pretend that, you know, that they had our backs, and they never did. So, you know, single-handedly the best gift, you know, we were philanthropic to the core. You know, we fed people. That was what the Lincy Foundation, you know, one of our cores really was, just basic needs. And I remember sitting and talking to our board and saying, this is that important. Brookings is that important. Lincy Institute is that important. And I said, because one day they will need less of people like us, because the community can actually pay its own bills. You don't need to look to philanthropists. You just give it all away. So it is the best gift we've ever given. I feel like it's going to transform our state. It's going to make us better at what we do. But quite frankly, I mean, we've got to start to act. It can't just be a slide. I love what Brian's saying. We need to make people know that this is out there, and are we moving it forward? Quick, slow, constant. We need to have this constant information in front of the people who matter. And guess what? You know what? If you make it in front of everybody, then your general public starts to get it. You know, for the first time, we're having conversations about mining. You know, mining has been the untouchable. Well, here, I got an idea, mining. Let's either tax everybody or let's tax you. I mean, why isn't somebody saying that? Because personally, I think that's the option. Everybody is going to have a state income tax, or guess what? Mining step up to the plate. And I think that the state would turn and they'd say, you know what? This doesn't make any sense. Why have we allowed this? they're not that powerful people. There are very, very few of them. But we allow our legislators to go up north and, kumbaya it and then come back here and say, it didn't work out so well. So I feel like this has been, like I said, our finest gift. I believe it will be the one that continues to give back to this community. And yes, we did not feed people, but I think people will need less food because of it. And I am very, very proud of every time I sit in this room, every time I hear what the lovely people are doing at the Lincy Institute. I'm so proud. I go into a nonprofit room and, and we're funding, let's just say United Way, and that's all they can talk about is like a Ramona. And I have a lot of pride in that. So congratulations, keep it up. But remember, I don't have 10 years. Let's faster.
I'm going to start off a little differently and just say, there were several people that kind of made this happen. And what's most remarkable to me is that I often find myself helping to launch new ideas about what we can do in higher ed, and they grow, and they don't always grow the way you thought. And this one actually worked. So I'm kind of super impressed. I wish Bill Antholis was in the room. Because he was in on the initial conversations, and a person who's missing from the campus, Ron Smith, who was just a wonderful guy, but who came when I got here. We were partners in crime, and he was working on a program called Urban 21. I never really knew what the 21 stood for, but it was all about urban sustainability. And we would have actually long conversations about what the role of the university was and how we ought to reach out to people. And the meat of that conversation went like this. Las Vegas is a city that grew up super fast. It left a ton of pieces behind. We have not built a sustaining soft or hard infrastructure. The human capital pieces were missing. The social services, education, healthcare pieces were missing. Heck, whether we ought to have a ring road or not. Oh, no, I forgot they're building it up so we can have a bypass to Carson City instead, where there are so very many people, as you pointed out earlier, Rob. We asked the question, what was the answer? And then the other piece of it was, even back then, as we were just on the leading edge of the Great Recession of 2008, we knew that the economy wasn't diversified, that we were kind of the economic equivalent of monoculture, which puts you at risk. And so all of those things were simmering. And as we looked at how we were going to try to develop UNLV, we realized that this institution had to be the database, the knowledge base that served the community, and we had to be kind of a gold standard. So at that point, we had the Center for Business and Economic Research, CBER, headed up by Keith Schwer, who's also passed, and people turned to Keith when they needed information about what was going on. We have a gaming institute that provided a lot of information, and we had the Lead Real Estate Institute, but there was nothing that was really addressing all these giant gaps the city had. So we talked about it, and then one day we were over in the foundation building, and actually one November we had a meeting that Brian brought here of the Brookings Institution, and we got to meet a bunch of folks, and we said at that point, well, we want you to come out to our building and have a chat and talk to us, Mark Moreau and Rob, this report you've got about the Intermountain West. And they gave the report, and it was like an electric shock went through me. And I said, wow, that's everything we've been saying, except they said it a lot better than we've ever said it before. And I looked over at Ron Smith, and I said, we have got to get these guys out here. And little did I know that that was in Brian's head, and that this was something that Lindy was really interested in. And we'd been working with Lindy before all of this started to happen. So we approached Bill Antholis, and Brian being the godfather of the deal, and Lindy being the front person for Krikorian and the Lincy Foundation. And I won't go through all the machinations, but it was a multiple leveraging exercise in which we had to put a lot of different things together and then wait for a shoe to drop. And the shoe that dropped was a phone call between the senator and Kerkorian and some other folks that ultimately led to a substantial sum of money that just launched this whole initiative and launched it in a really good form. But that's just a little bit of the history. But here's the most fun part. When we conceptualized it, we said, well, here's Brookings Mountain West, and over here's going to be the Lincy Institute. What do we need the Lincy Institute to do? Let's attend to what I would call the soft infrastructure holes that we have. You know, education, healthcare, social services. These are huge, huge problems. Let's make the Lincy that gold standard of data production that will help to guide us into better decision making. And let's use that to leverage some of these federal funds, because Lindy was so very focused on the loss of federal funds that we had and how we could do better to support these activities. And there was no locus for generating the data. In fact, a very cynical person would say the less data we had, the better it was for some folks. Because if you don't know what you're talking about, it's very hard to prove you've been wronged. And we have been wronged. So with that in place, we then talked about the Brookings role. And the Brookings role was going to be to connect local knowledge and this piece to inside the Beltway understandings, which would better connect us to federal funding opportunities and allow a reverse brain drain to occur, where we took great heads out of DC, brought them here, let them infuse our campus with their understandings and the old expression was, think globally, act locally. Well, what a better model for that. So the thing that is so incredibly gratifying to me is it's worked, and it's worked really well. So about you got here in spring of 2010. So this is, 3 short years. Really, we've been structuring and writing proposals and doing all that kind of stuff you do to get things off the ground. But in those 3 short years, here's what's happened. We have a Brookings minor. We have 17 scholars a year coming out from Brookings who teach classes and do scholarly research with our folks. We have our folks going to Washington. We have our students going to Washington as interns. We have non-resident Brookings Fellows here, which is something that Ivy League institutions are proud to proclaim, and we have upped our game by a lot. And that's just the direct benefit to UNLV. UNLV is more active on a scholarly basis. Our faculty have more collaborations with impressive people from all over the world. As a result, our students have access to the best policy thinking in the world. I couldn't be happier with just that piece. But then you can crank in, so we've got teaching, we've got research, let's talk service. Now we've got the Lincy Institute Brookings connection, and the information that you saw today. First, it should make you mad. And second, it should point out the path, because until we have the data, we couldn't really say much. We couldn't really do much. We had a supposition. Well, it's not fair. Doesn't feel right. Oh, no, it's fair. Don't worry, it's fair. That's kind of the dialogue that was going on. Now we know better. But it isn't just about fairness. It's not my goal to see Washoe County residents get fewer federal dollars. It's our goal to see Las Vegas residents get their fair share of federal dollars and to build all of the capacity of the state. It's kind of crazy to starve Las Vegas. It makes no sense. So as we take the data that has been so wonderfully presented to us today, and I know it's teaser data, but boy, oh boy, it was really good teaser data. And we turn that around and say, you've got to talk with us now. In fact, the federal we have to understand as a state where to invest money so that we get our fair share from the feds, and how we can use that money to its best effect here in our state to support the aspirations and prosperity of this region. And that was actually a word that Lindy and Brian will probably remember we all used a lot, which was a prosperous region sits on a kind of a three-legged stool. You've got to have great human capital, that is the soft infrastructure. You must have a hard infrastructure that supports and creates sustainability, and you have to be able to have economic diversification in a robust economy in order to deliver. And that is also, by the way, the credo of the Metro Division. And if you put those things together, you'll be able to build going forward. And that is what we hope to do here when we began this. And that is what UNLV has said it needs to do to be a good partner for our region. And by golly, I think you've made a lot of progress. And I want to congratulate everybody here for a great job. And the what's next is perfectly obvious. Take the data and use it to change our situation. And so it's a call to arms. Thank you very much.
We're late. We had so much more, but I'll just add one closing comment. One, Lindy Schumacher, you were not crazy. It turns out, without having the data, you were right on target. And I think anybody, any adult paying attention here understood that. But what we've done is we've created a real foundation for change, because the first thing you had to do was make the case. You had to prove the point, you had to raise awareness on this, and the stuff we're about to roll out is going to be game-changing in that sense. Because what happens now is it's not deniable anymore. You can't pretend. What seems obvious is that, look, they're not worried about federal resources in the northern part of the state because they actually overperform. So they're not ever going to really be motivated to create the kind of infrastructure to capture the greater share of that unless we make that case. So what happens is everything comes to this state. The federal government sends what it thinks is an appropriate share. In a lot of cases, even if you don't do anything right, we're almost 1% of the US, they send you almost 1% of transportation money. And then what happens is they build a beltway around Carson City. And they tell us that I-11's a road to nowhere. And what I see, and Lindy, you weren't here in the beginning because we actually have the legislation to change things like that wired in already. You're right, it wouldn't take 10 years. It's going to take 3, 4, and 5 years. And by the 15th legislative session, you will see this completely flip. Because we have the Southern Nevada delegation meeting, we have all the information with UNLV has been the steward of this. You know, the chamber's a key partner and they've lobbied for it. The legislators wanted to do better, it turned out. When you really engaged and they said, I didn't have enough information to make these decisions. You get up there, you get worked, it's like Stockholm Syndrome, you're like Patty Hearst or something like that, I'm dating myself. You know, now that you folks have given us that, now that we have the chamber's support, now that UNLV has provided this role, we're good to go. We've made some impact already in this session, which has gone fabulous compared to where I thought it would go. And in the 15th session, we're ready for all of this. Under this leadership here, which I cannot thank enough, we are ready for that next round. And that we will never be where we were again. We will never be taken advantage of where we were again. And we won't do to the north what they did to us. My big point is, let's make sure we don't crater it, but at the same time, let's make sure that we get sufficient resources so that we grow our economy and lift the whole state in the process. Any last comments? 1 second.
I just want to say, and the person who deserves a really big round of applause, because at the end of the day, while a really nice plan came together, it took leadership. I think that Rob and Bill Brown have done a phenomenal job, and I just ask everybody here to thank them for their contributions.
And all the team, Lucy, everyone. Everyone's done a great job. Thank you. So we'll have more in the fall. We might do another version of this and tell you what happened in the legislature. Stay tuned. Thanks. And we have all that data coming out. Thanks.
Good job, Rob.